Incoming message from Dr. Light. NES Works episode 127 is complete. We are just about at the midpoint of 1989, and in a sense, the NES is already peaked for the year. Not to throw shade at everyone else's work, but everyone else's work isn't Mega Man 2. I think this speaks to one of the interesting things about 1989 for the NES. Namely, it was a year in which the console didn't see a single first-party Nintendo-developed game. Sure, there'll be Tetris in the fall, but that was Nintendo reworking someone else's invention to be shinier and, dare I say it, less interesting than certain other versions. The handful of games that Nintendo did publish for NES in 1989 were simply licensed in from other creators. Hudson's Faxanadu, for example. I suspect this is a side effect of the massive chip shortage that affected 1988's releases. Both of Nintendo's big games for 88, namely the sequels to Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda, were supposed to have launched in the spring or summer of 1988. But because Nintendo couldn't scrape together sufficient yields of the specific ROM chip those games required in order to stock up for a proper launch, neither Mario 2 nor Zelda 2 made it to stores in reasonable quantities until the very end of the year. As a result, it seems likely that the company decided, wisely, to spend 1989 marketing these massive sequels as they made their way into wide US release. As part of that process, I also suspect that the localized version of Super Mario Bros. 3, which launched in Japan around the same time that Mario 2 dragged its way to American shops, ended up being pushed back from a 1989 release into 1990 in order to give the previous game a decent 15 or 18 months to sell through. On top of that, it's also worth noting that Nintendo had almost entirely skipped cartridge development in favor of disk system exclusivity between the Japanese debut of The Legend of Zelda in early 1986 and the arrival of Super Mario Bros. 3 at the end of 1988. That 2.5-year gap left Nintendo with a pretty limited selection of suitable first-party creations to choose from for localization in 89. Since the majority of the disk system titles they didn't bring over were either outdated by this point, think Nazo no Murasame Joe, or else simply couldn't have been converted to NES cartridges due to their heavy reliance on text. Think the Famicom Detective Club series, a pair of games so crammed with text that they had to ship on 2 discs apiece. As a result, Nintendo really had no choice but to fade back on NES for a while and just let third parties dominate in 1989. First-party hype for 89 consisted of Mario 2 and Zelda 2 promos, banging the drum for the fully authorized version of Tetris, and of course tons of press for the Game Boy's debut. And that's great. Third parties just so happened to bring it in 1989. And while those publishing partners certainly delivered tons of creative misses, even those weren't always bad. For every creatively bankrupt kung fu heroes, there was an inventive disaster like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. For every boring shooting range or unbalanced Amagon, we had something surprising like Dance Aerobics, or weird like Taboo. And once every couple of months, a genuine masterpiece like Ninja Gaiden or DuckTales would come along. For June 1989, that masterpiece took the form of Capcom's Mega Man 2. Mega Man 2 seems an unlikely creation. I mean, the original Mega Man was really good, if alarmingly difficult, and packaged in pure tragedy. But did anyone buy it? Evidently not, because Capcom apparently didn't authorize the existence of this sequel. One of the famous anecdotes about Mega Man 2 revolves around its origins, namely the fact that the development team created it on the sly. I'm sure this tale has grown taller in the telling, but the legend goes something like this. The Mega Man team created a good game, sold poorly, so Capcom assigned that group to work on a different and unrelated project instead of a follow-up. That unrelated project, incidentally, might have been one of the most creatively bankrupt Famicom cartridges ever commissioned. Proyaku Satsujin Jiken cynically combined the two big genres on Famicom at the time, baseball games and Portopia-inspired murder mysteries, into a mashup calculated to give consumers the content they longed to consume, or something. And the dev team created and shipped it. But supposedly, in their after-hours time, they tinkered with the sequel to Mega Man, a bigger, more polished game featuring new bosses, new weapons, more stages, and best-in-class visuals and sound. It's hard to say precisely how much of the story is really true. Did Mega Man 2 come into existence entirely on the sly, with the creators presenting Capcom's executive team with a complete ROM so beautiful that they had no choice but to put it into manufacturing? Or was it more a matter of the team putting together an early sample build and presenting it to their bosses, who noted its improvements and obvious appeal and greenlit it for full development? Or is all of this just a load of fluffed up hooey? Frankly, I don't know, and I honestly don't care. The important thing is that Mega Man 2 exists, and it's nearly perfect. Well, okay, maybe that's exaggerating. It's not nearly perfect. Mega Man 2 has plenty of flaws if you sit down and pick apart every screen of the game the way that hardcore Mega Man fans do. But the thing is, there would be no such thing as hardcore Mega Man fans if Mega Man 2 did not, to put it in technical terms, kick all kinds of ass. Mega Man 2 suffers from some occasional balancing and design issues, but it raised the bar for console action games to the same degree that Ninja Gaiden did, though in a very different way. Where Ninja Gaiden was about mastering precise, almost predetermined actions and patterns, Mega Man 2 is a game about player choice. It carries forward that quality from the original Mega Man, of course. That game opened by dropping players into a screen that forced them to select one of 6 stages to tackle. The sequel begins where the original left off, almost literally. Rather than boot into a simple title screen, Mega Man 2 opens with a brief story recap, accompanied by the ending theme from the first game. The cityscape view, presumably the same city seen in the background of the first game's credits as Mega Man runs home across the countryside to Dr. Light's lab, pans up the side of a building, and once it reaches the top, the reprised music takes a sharp swerve, launching into a driving, energetic theme instead of Mega Man's cheerful end credits bop. It's a simple beginning, but it manages to be every bit as exciting and cinematic as the cold opening to Ninja Gaiden, while investing a whole lot less time into reading scrolling text. Mega Man looks out over the city and warps into action, and you're off to the races. Much like the title screen tune, everything about Mega Man 2 feels like Mega Man, but better. Although the main character himself remains largely unchanged from the original, using the same sprites and wielding the same ability to swipe enemy powers, the world around him has changed. And truth be told, even Mega Man himself has changed more than first appearances let on. Small details and tweaks make him more enjoyable to control here. While he looks the same as in the first game, aside from the rainbow of new colors he uses when he equips enemy weapons, he now suffers less knockback and stun time when struck by enemies, moves a little more smoothly, and has the ability to collect expendable reserve energy tanks that allow players to top up his health in a pinch. He also has the ability to wield 3 non-weapon items provided to him by Dr. Light at the end of specific stages. These tools functionally replace the first game's magnet beam, a device that you needed to collect from a seemingly random spot in the world in order to complete the game, but which wasn't explained or even highlighted outside of the manual. Mega Man 2 leaves nothing to chance. You also need Item 1 in order to clear a wide gap before the first boss in Dr. Wily's fortress, just like in the previous adventure. But because the items are mandatory handouts, there's no chance of you reaching that point without the tools you need and having to return to a completed stage to hunt down your gadget. In fact, you can't return to previously completed stages here. The magnet beam allowed you to create temporary platforms, and items 1 and 3 do something similar, though in a more active sense. Item 1 allows you to create up to 3 tiny platforms that slowly rise into the air before vanishing. These don't work in confined spaces, so Item 3 does something similar for tight spots. It generates a single platform that bounces along the ground until it hits a wall, at which point it begins crawling up the wall until it reaches the top. And finally, Item 2 creates a jet platform that streaks forward until it hits a wall. You need all 3 items in order to complete the game due to the presence of deadly environmental hazards in Dr. Wily's lair. But you can use these items at any time once you have them, which means that you'll probably end up saving Heatman's lair until after you collect Item 2, so that you can just fly past the tedious and seemingly unending vanishing block sequence in that stage's final chamber. Mega Man's innate skills would change and evolve throughout the series, but Mega Man 2 establishes a standard for the franchise. Mega Man would always look and move and shoot the same from one game to another, at least on NES and later on Wii, and the variety in each game comes from the world around him. In this case, that world looks magnificent. Mega Man 2 sports some of the most detailed and varied graphics yet seen on NES. It builds on the style of the original Mega Man, pairing cartoonish characters with detailed, intricate environments. Although this combination has the potential to result in chaotic or mismatched visual elements, the low resolution and limited color options of the NES work in the graphics' favor. The rounded, comical characters somehow feel right at home in these settings. The environments absolutely burst with detail, ranging from the spinning gears and conveyor mechanisms of Metal Man's stage to the pulsating waterfall that serves as Bubble Man's backdrop, to the scorching uplighting that highlights the masonry of Heat Man's level. Meanwhile, Mega Man and his enemies alike operate in a simpler style, with large areas of flat color and googly eyes. Yet the meticulous artistry invested into these marauding robots keeps them grounded in the world. Keen details like simple volumetric shading on large, rounded areas of metal give enemies mass, while impressionistic hints, metal seams and bolts and joint hinges give the whimsical murder bots an unexpectedly grounded feel. Mega Man faces off against far more enemies than he did in the original. Not only does he face down 8 robot masters versus the first game's 6, those bosses each command a wider variety of minions, too. More than any other game to date, outside of maybe Super Mario Bros. 2, the Mega Man 2 bestiary feels wholly cohesive. You won't find any of the abstract blobs found in various vertical shooters, or the weirdo dudes of Ninja Gaiden here. It didn't make any sense for a guy with a pumpkin for a head to be chucking knives at Ryu Hayabusa, but if a deadly robot jack-o'-lantern showed up here, you just kind of shrug and say, yeah, that seems about right. There are no jack-o'-lanterns in this particular Mega Man, though, because all the enemy machines you battle fit in aesthetically with the themed worlds they occupy, even if it doesn't seem like they should. So you get things like giant anglerfish spewing robot prawns, enormous robotic frogs spitting baby frogs, Mega Man seeking jellyfish mines, and mechanical hermit crabs that go on the attack when you blast away their shells, and that's just in Bubble Man's stage. Every level contains a veritable menagerie of evil robots to battle against, ranging from the minuscule, like the tiny birds that hatch from egg bombs and swarm to attack Mega Man, to the massive, like fire-breathing wolves, and deadly walkers piloted by the returning Sniper Joe enemies. Of course, as in the first game, the most dangerous foes you face are generally Mega Man-sized. The 8 robot masters you have to defeat in order to unlock the path to Dr. Wily's fortress showcase greater variety and much better balance than the guys you faced in the original Mega Man. There are no bosses who can blitz you before you have a chance to get your bearings, the way a Luckman could. And for the most part, the bosses take a little more effort to defeat, even if you know their weaknesses. Many of the bosses play like variants on the original Robot Masters, which makes sense narratively. The original Robot Masters were created in collaboration by Doctors Wily and Light, but these guys were wholly invented by Wily for revenge. Wily may be a weirdo genius who can construct skull-shaped battle fortresses like it's no big deal, but he's not above a little light plagiarism, evidently being a pioneer of not only robotics but also AI. So you have Crash Man, who attacks like a more aggressive rocket-powered Bomb Man. You have Quick Man, whose boomerang-based attack skills make him a redux of Cut Man, running around to body-check Mega Man like a double-speed Elec Man. There's Heat Man, who launches his flames in an arc rather than straight ahead the way Fireman did, and can zip invincibly across the room to put pressure on Mega Man. Metal Man, who stands at the opposite end of the screen and fires 3 shots of his weapon at a time, like Iceman. And finally, Woodman is effectively Guts Man Redux, a hulking bruiser who slowly leaps toward Mega Man between tossing a massive projectile at you. At the same time, Wily did come up with some new ideas. Flashman doesn't do much besides run toward you, but eventually he'll activate his power, which causes you to freeze helplessly for a few seconds while he shoots at you with a burst of plasma. Bubble Man attacks in a room lined with mines that will kill you at a single touch, leaping and shooting toward you while firing sine wave-like bubbles that force you to leap into the line of his fire. And Airman, well, he cannot be defeated. Now, actually, it just takes a few shots of Woodman's wood shield to take down Airman. But if you go after Airman first, a natural inclination for most people, his mildly challenging level leads you to one of the most difficult boss battles in the game. Airman fills his room with tiny tornadoes that block incoming fire before sweeping their way toward Mega Man and delivering massive damage. It's even hard to hit Airman with a weapon that he's weak to, since the wood shield giant projectile form has difficulty slipping past the tornado barrier without being deflected. Many of Mega Man 2's bosses introduce secondary considerations like this. And while they don't hit as hard as the Robot Masters in the original game, leaving you more time to react and respond, they require some effort to unravel, especially as you try to deduce their weaknesses. Mega Man 2 can be a little daunting the first time around, assuming you play without a guide. Although some of the Robot Masters have obvious vulnerabilities, the move away from the original game's rock, paper, scissors theme makes some weapon choices unintuitive. Yes, Woodman, the robot made out of a tree, will be utterly blitzed if you hit him with a fully charged blast of Heatman's atomic fire. Yes, Heatman can be extinguished by Bubbleman's watery projectiles. And if you stop to think about it, it makes perfect sense that the speedy Quickman will take damage if you freeze him in place with Flashman's Time Stopper. And even Crashman's weakness to Airman's attack has a certain logic to it. Not in terms of character themes, but because the upward arc of Airman's tornadoes perfectly counter Crashman's tendency to leap around the arena. But what weapon makes sense against Flashman? Or what about Metal Man, whose name defines him as the most generic robot imaginable? To its credit, Mega Man 2's level design does a great job of coaxing you to experiment with the weapons you collect, and most stages favor the use of the current boss's weakness. Crashman's stage consists almost entirely of a vertical ascent, so you'll naturally gravitate toward Airman's weapon anyway, to take out enemies that spawn above you. Quickman's stage is filled with deadly instant-kill lasers that can be evaded with perfect timing and memorization, or you can fire off Flashman's Time Stopper to freeze him in place. Granted, you'll want to top off the Time Stopper's energy before taking on the boss, but the very present and very deadly threat of the laser traps more or less forces new players to utilize the Time Stopper in order to survive. A surprising number of standard enemies are completely invulnerable to Mega Man's default weapon, too, which further coaxes you into exploring alternate attack methods. It's all incredibly well thought out, except for one detail: the Metal Blade. Much like Gears of War 2, the only problem with the Metal Blade is that it's too good. Defeating Metal Man gives you access to the single most effective weapon in the entire Mega Man series, a tool so good that you really have to force yourself to use anything else. The Metal Blade has the ability to fire multiple fast-moving shots in 8 directions. Its projectiles hit most enemies hard, and it costs almost nothing to shoot. Even on hard difficulty, which is actually just the default difficulty of the Japanese release, the Metal Blade can solve most threats in just a few shots, including the majority of bosses. And it's one of the easiest weapons to acquire, too. Metal Man's stage is pretty easy to complete if you take care around the giant spike traps. Watch that huge jump toward the end. This leads you to the fight with Metal Man, a robot that seems to suffer from something like self-loathing. He only really attacks you once you open fire, behaves with a simple pattern, and when you face him in the Wily Fortress rematch, turns out to be incredibly weak to his own weapon, which will take him out in 2 hits in hard mode. The thing is, I'm not really sure I'd call the Metal Blade's effectiveness a flaw in the game so much as a part of its appeal. Yes, it lets you steamroll much of Mega Man 2 with its incredible utility and energy efficiency, but you don't have to use it. Like I said, Mega Man 2 is a game about player choice. If you choose the easy approach and spoil your own experience, that's on you. But there's nothing inherently wrong with having the option to break a game, especially one as well crafted as Mega Man 2. It's the kind of thoughtfully made NES experience that you can enjoy over and over again, experimenting with different permutations of weapons and boss sequences each time. Mega Man 2 lets you play the way you want to play. You can use the Time Stopper to freeze Quickman's lasers, but you can also learn their patterns and play it straight. You can skip Heatman's Vanishing Block Gauntlet with Item 2, but you can also suck it up and tackle them the hard way. You can cheese most situations with a Metal Blade, or try to survive with only Mega Man's standard gun. On top of its visual artistry, tight controls, and unbelievably excellent music, Mega Man 2 stands out for the sheer amount of flexibility it offers. It stands right alongside games like The Legend of Zelda and Super Mario Bros. 2 for the way it allows players to play their own way. A game that doesn't just add nearly infinite replay variation options to an hour of content, but one that begs for players to add their own little stylistic touches to the experience. And it never lets up with surprises. Each level follows the same general flow of the original game, which designer Akira Kitamura has described as a succession of rising challenges punctuated by short reprieves in which players can catch their breath before facing the next, more difficult obstacle. The same underlying design philosophy that drove the flow of Nintendo's Game & Watch line, expanded into 8-bit audio-visual glory. But there's something new and different around every corner. Will it be a giant sky oni that fades into view when you come near? A narrow channel of explosive mines that you need to navigate with steely nerves? A series of tiny platforms comprised of slippery flooring? Alternate stage paths that lead to better rewards provided you have the proper tools? Or torch guys who double as stage lighting and plunge the screen into blackness when destroyed? Even once you reach Wily's Fortress stage, the surprises still never let up. Where Mega Man ripped open Wily's Fortress with his bare hands in the original game, here you enter by using items to climb walls and leap over an impassable gap, only to be confronted with a massive cartoon dragon that appears out of nowhere and chases you to a dead end. Capcom wasn't shy about using images of the Mecha Dragon to promote Mega Man 2, but this boss's first appearance still comes as a shock, especially if it warps into you for an instant kill while you sensibly hang toward the back edge of the screen as the game shifts into an auto-scrolling platforming sequence over a bottomless death pit. It's a little unfair, yes, but it certainly puts the fear of God into you. The game keeps throwing curveballs until the very end. Hidden gaps in the floor that you need to track with the bubble lead weapon, a giant tank built in Gutsman's image, giant metal piranhas that leap from the polluted water of the fortress's lowest levels. And you know it's the lowest levels because the game tracks your progress on the detailed fortress map display. Again, it's like Ninja Gaiden, but more functional. It's all here, and once you defeat the Robot Masters a second time, and destroy Wily's rebuilt war machine, the game hits you with one final plot twist. The floor explodes beneath you, plunging you to an oubliette, while Wily reveals his true form and transforms into an alien. Well, not really, it's just a hologram, but it certainly is a shocking moment the first time it happens. And granted, the holographic alien is a pretty rough fight at the end of such a lengthy platform combat gauntlet. It moves quickly around the screen while firing your own plasma bullets at you, hits hard, and can only be damaged by the bubble lead, a weapon that rolls along the ground even though the alien always flies around above it. Like the Boo Beam Trap boss, which can only be destroyed by rationing every shot of a fully charged up crash bomb, Wily's alien is a little unfair. If you run out of bubble lead energy, you're out of luck, as the alien's dungeon contains no power-up items. Your only choice is to waste lives and hit continue, but if you do that, you'll lose all the energy tanks you earned, meaning you have to beat this difficult fight on a single life bar. I can be honest with myself and admit that I have no objectivity when it comes to Mega Man 2. I've loved this game since the moment I brought it home at launch with the money I earned mowing lawns and painting houses so that I could buy it as quickly as possible based entirely on magazine previews and screenshots. Mega Man 2 is a game I've come to know inside and out, but I can appreciate the fact that some people will be put off by its sometimes lopsided difficulty and the frankly unfair nature of many of its bosses. It's not as refined as later Mega Man games, and Mega Man himself lacks many of the utility skills he'd gained in later episodes. The ability to slide, to charge up his basic weapon, and to summon allies in a pinch. But still, I'm not alone in my admiration of Mega Man 2. When Inti Creates went back to the basics, build Mega Man 9 in the style of an 8-bit game, they specifically looked to Mega Man 2 as their touchstone. They stripped Mega Man's skills down to the abilities he commands here in order to create a pure, straightforward experience. Maybe that ultimately means that Mega Man 2 is the most nostalgic and beloved of the series, and that Mega Man 9 was a cynical ploy to harvest the old member berries. But it does speak to Mega Man 2's clarity of design and its impact back in 1989. Nintendo's first-party releases may have been in short supply in '89, but with games like this on offer, we barely even noticed. And it certainly didn't hurt that Nintendo Power gave this game coverage on par with Nintendo's own heavy hitters, Mario 2 and Zelda 2. Mega Man 2 made its first appearance in the March-April '89 issue with a pair of tiny screenshots that showed Mega Man battling the two bosses of Wily's Fortress. Even in the tiny CES report format, demanded attention. The following issue dedicated a 4-page spread to showcasing chunks of several stages and explaining some of the mechanics. I can't say the artwork they created for this future is necessarily the most attractive or flattering material imaginable, but it does indicate a higher degree of creative investment than usual. And to top it off, Mega Man 2 appeared as the cover feature for the July-August issue with a staggering 16-page spread. That's a lot of pages, but it drove home the point. Play this game. Mega Man 2 would be a regular fixture of the magazine for the following year, appearing in popularity rankings in the tips section, culminating in a breakdown of the password system that allowed players to create their own custom passwords. Anyway, needless to say, Capcom didn't seem particularly reluctant to greenlight a sequel to this game. I just wish the series could have maintained that popularity long enough for us to get Mega Man Legends 3. Next time on NES Works, can the average Joes defeat the Purple Cobras? Find out in Marvel Comics.